Hello, everybody, and welcome to this very first episode of the Visual Studio Remote Office Hours in the year 2021. I'm glad to see you here again. I hope you had a good holiday break. I for sure did myself. And today we are talking about something very, very exciting. We're going to talk about the new extensibility model in Visual Studio. And you might think, oh, this is just for people writing extensions. What does that have to do with me? Well, probably a lot more than you think, because the extensibility model is in Visual Studio is what every feature of Visual Studio uses under the hood. So it's a very broad topic that's going to address a lot of different things. And I have a whole panel of people. This is the first time we're going to be 4 people on this call. So let's bring them in. You'll recognize them. They are all wearing yellow. And so hello, everybody. Let's go around. Let's start in the upper left corner. Bertan, that's you. Can you please introduce yourself? Then hand it over to Tina and then Leslie.
Yep, I'm Bertan Eigen. I am a developer in the Visual Studio team, and I'm working on the next extensibility framework. So I'm excited to hear your comments and questions. Tina?
Yeah, I'm Tina Schrepfer. I'm an engineering manager for Visual Studio, specifically on the extensibility team. So my team's charter is to improve the lives of extension developers and consumers, both current extensibly form and the future. Leslie?
Hey everyone, I'm Leslie Richardson. I'm the PM on the Visual Studio extensibility team alongside Tina, and I work with Bertan. And yeah, we're just working on making the extensibility experience a lot better for both writers and users.
Well, that is very exciting. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. I'm like super excited for this because obviously I love extensions, and I feel like most of our viewers do too. And whether you write extensions or you use them, they're a wonderful thing. I think we should just start with the beginning. Tina, why are we doing a new extensibility story in Visual Studio? What's wrong with the one we've got? What's the point of this?
I think there are many facets to that answer. One is we've kind of known for a long time that our extensively model, as it is today, is very complex, and it also has performance or reliability issues. Because it runs in the same process as Visual Studio or DevEnv, anytime that an extension crashes or slows, it could really, it brings down the whole system. On the flip side, for extension developers, a lot of our APIs are also legacy, and they're not uniform across the whole space. So it's a very steep learning curve. So for example, if you want to write a simple spell checker, it takes a lot of learning to, learn the editor APIs, to learn table control, to learn how to initialize a MEF, and like to learn all of that before you can actually get to your core component, which is analyzing the buffer and then producing errors. I think the drive for a new extensively model that we have right now is really derived from Codespaces. And the main reason for that is because Codespace is kind of a client-server technology. If we were to run extensions in the same process as the server, and that extension were to crash or hang, it would be a lot. It would be not desirable at all to have your server do that. Right, in a local scenario, you have more flexibility because you have direct access to your machine, so you can delete files or reboot your machine. But in a server scenario, you don't have as much access. So for that reason, we definitely want to bring things out of DevEnv. And at the same time, we also want to revamp our ecosystem and our APIs to be more modern and to be more uniform and easier to learn.
All right. So it kind of started from the Codespaces. Maybe we should just explain what is GitHub Codespaces and how does Visual Studio play a role in that?
Yeah, so Visual Studio Codespaces is really about bringing Visual Studio to the cloud. So imagine if you have, if you're a new hire on a team, right? Like traditionally what you've had to do is you get a machine, you have to set that up, you have to install whatever runtime you need, whatever tools you need, and then get going. With Visual Studio Codespaces, it really becomes that you have access to a VM and that VM is already prepped for you. So all you need to do is tell the VM, hey, I want to clone this environment, and and that clone this repo, and that repo would also we already have the information that you would need to say, I want to install this runtime, these extensions, and this IDE, and then it's you can access it from anywhere.
Right. So we're basically dealing with a client and a server, as you were mentioning, where the server VM or whatever in the cloud talk to the client, your regular Visual Studio on your local machine. And so there is now, so by nature, the communication between the client and the server has to be async, right? And all the APIs currently in Visual Studio are probably not async.
Yes.
Most of them are kind of old. They're built in a synchronous way before async await was even thought of, right?
Yes, yes.
So Bertan, when we're talking about like client server and async by default, like how much did that play into the decision to how can I phrase this? Like the implementation of the new extensibility model. Like how does that work?
So I mean, in the new extensibility model, as Tina mentioned, async is the primary scenario. Especially with GitHub Codespaces, with broker services, async becomes the core requirement for all APIs nearly. So we are rethinking our APIs to be async friendly, to be not main thread. Like they won't block the UI thread anymore. So those kind of decisions, we'll have to make those kind of decisions in the new design, which means that we'll have nearly a complete new set of APIs to work with that are going to be a lot more async friendly, C# friendly, and they're going to be easier to understand, especially in this complicated world where services can be in different places, different processes.
Yeah, right. So if everything is like that, then if everything is async by default, that means that all the existing functionality in Visual Studio has to be rewritten in an async fashion to use this new API? Like, are we rewriting basically all of Visual Studio to consume this new async APIs?
We are making it compatible. We are rewriting what's necessary. We are making things compatible as needed, but we're going to make sure the APIs work. I mean, it's not like when you use the async APIs, they're going to work, and you're not going to have Our goal is not to have responsiveness issues anymore going forward. So Our goal is that if you're using the new APIs, you're on the right track to ensure that users have a good experience with Visual Studio extensibility.
Yeah.
Like users have a good experience with your extensions. It's going to be much harder for extensions to slow down Visual Studio.
So we might expect to see like higher, or is it like a higher quality of using Visual Studio is going to feel better when we have more and more extensions moving over, both internal and external extensions. I think it's fair to say, right? Every code that uses the new API is going to help stabilize and improve Visual Studio. Is that the goal I'm kind of hearing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
So Leslie, what does that then mean for existing extensions out there? Like, are we deprecating the current extensibility model? Do they have to switch over to this new, the new model, or how are we going to do that?
So just to ease people's fears about that, we have currently no plans whatsoever to deprecate the existing model. Really, the only main reason why you really need to swap over to that new extensibility model is if you want your extension to be compatible with Codespaces. So if you have an extension that you've written and you've got Codespaces in mind and you want to cater to that particular audience, then you're going to have to write it within this new model. But at this point in time, the existing extensions that you know and love that have been written using our model that we've had for years is not going away anytime soon.
So if you have an extension that currently works today, it will continue to work tomorrow in this new world.
Yeah.
You just won't be able to take advantage of this new nice extensibility model. Is that how to think of it?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And then of course, aside from like the Codespace aspect of the new model, there's also just the increased reliability of things from the user side. Mm-hmm. So if you're using an extension that was written using this new model, then chances are it's less likely to be crashing your IDE or a feature or causing something to hang or negatively affecting a different extension that you have installed, all that jazz.
Yeah. So it's something we really want people to adopt as soon as they can, I guess, because it makes everything more reliable and performant, and everything's better, right, in the new world. But realistically, it takes a little time for people to make the move, right? They might have a big code base, and so they're fine. So what is it that they're gonna? So if my extension today is gonna work again tomorrow, what am I missing out on? What are the things I can't do anymore because they require the new API, for instance?
As far as like what you can't do, it's, I mean, again, one, the reliability thing. So it may not be as reliable now. So if you've had the issue where you have an extension running or you were the developer of that extension, you've received complaints or concerns from customers about how it's negatively impacting their IDE environment as a whole, then that's one of them. The second is, of course, Codespaces. And the third is if you are a writer of extensions, or let's say you're onboarding somebody who's new to writing extensions, or you just want to write an extension for the very first time, as it exists now, it can be really hard to get into that because a lot of the APIs are not as uniform as they could be. There's a lot of legacy code. There's just a lot of unintuitive pieces that you need to figure out kind of on your own. And as somebody who was also a little bit new to writing extensions myself, going into the docs as they are today, it's very challenging to figure out what pieces I need in order to just make the most basic of extensions and then go from there. So that is something that we really hope to improve in the new model as well.
All right. Yep. Okay. So there's a question here from Asbjørn that I think we should just take right now. He's asking, basically, this new model, are we still going to be able to use C# or are we being forced into JavaScript like they did with Office? And he's not a fan of that, let's say. So what programming languages are we using here for this?
We're sticking to C#. I don't know if Tina and Bertrand want to jump in on that.
No, it's C# mainly. So
C# mainly. So is that C# full framework, .NET full framework? Is it .NET 5? What are we talking about here?
It's, let's say .NET Core, but yeah.
Like .NET Standard, you can write your DLL and so anything that's compatible with whatever Visual Studio is running, which is 4.7, .NET Framework 4.7.2 or something.
Well, these extensions are going to be out of process. That's the big model change for us. So we are a bit more flexible on which frameworks we can use.
Oh, so you can write .NET Core.
Yes.
Okay, that's fantastic. So maybe not .NET 5 yet, but at some point we'll upgrade to that, and how it works. Okay. Well, that was a great question. I'm glad that we talked about that because, of course, a lot of extensibility things out there are JavaScript, and one of the questions that have been coming up is, what about Visual Studio Code? Because that, of course, is completely JavaScript or TypeScript rather, extensibility model. Are we gonna be in Visual Studio, since it's now C#, are there going to be any compatibility between Visual Studio Code extensions and Visual Studio extensions in this new world, Tina?
Our goal is not to converge the two models. Like our goal is not to create an extensively platform that works for both VS Code and VS. And the main reason for that is they're really two different products, right? VS Code is more of an editor. It's lightweight. You can use it really quickly to kind of edit a single file, or you can build a JavaScript TypeScript solution on top of it. VS is a lot more, it's an IDE, it's an integrated development environment. So it has a lot more features than VS Code offers. So we want to keep our extensibility model catering towards Visual Studio itself and not converge the two platforms. However, there are points in our extensibility model where it might make sense to converge. So a good example of that would be language server protocol. So language server protocol is something that VS Code invented that basically that says, if you code against this protocol in any language, you'll be able to move your language server and then use it to drive language experiences in any platform that supports this protocol, so which includes VS and VS Code. So in those scenarios, we would converge using the same protocol, right? But there might still be a thin shim layer that you need to write that's VS or VS Code specific to activate those extensions.
And so
yeah.
does that mean that for VS Code, in order to use the language server protocol, you would write TypeScript that does that communication, and in Visual Studio you would do that in C#? But
right.
the language server itself can be written in whatever language you want.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, so we do that for language services. What other things are we sharing with VS Code?
Debug protocol is another example. It's very similar, but for debugging scenarios.
Yeah. And I think we got some TextMate support as well.
Yes, TextMate also. I think there are certain avenues that we might look into where the two APIs or the two architecture might look similar, but it's definitely not our priority one goal to say we're going to create a single platform for both.
Right. One question that I get asked sometimes is, can I install a Visual Studio Code theme in Visual Studio? And of course, no, you cannot. But why not? Is that a thing that, it's just a question I've gotten a lot, but have you gotten that question? Do we have an answer? Are we going to do it in the future?
Our priority right now, anything is possible in the future, and we're kind of take a look at what customer feedback is and what is technically feasible at the moment. But at the moment, at least for the next 6 to 12 months, what we're really planning on extensions that support kind of like the data model layer, right? We're not really looking at the UX side of things yet. We're more looking at editors. We're looking at file access, project systems, anything that doesn't touch the UI. Yeah.
Okay. So that was one thing that I was thinking about was if we're not looking at the UI, because we have all our logic running on a server somewhere, right, on a machine on the other side of the planet, for all we know. We can't send, or how would you send UI over? It had to be a web view maybe, or what if you want to add a button to a toolbar? That would be an extension. How do we have a solution for that yet?
So buttons are interesting because it's kind of UI, but it's really not. So buttons today, or any commands that you want to surface today in Visual Studio, right? It's done declaratively through VSCT. So we're not asking you to write XAML, right? We're not asking you to write any markup for button or command support. So we're going to continue that, not necessarily VSCT, but some similar form of declarative format that you can add commands to the system. For actual UI, let's say you want to add a new tool window, or if you want to add an adorner, that's something that we're still currently exploring. So we've done a couple of prototypes to sort of bring UI out of process, but we haven't really found a good solution. One is we want to make sure that whatever UI framework that we land on is mature and is intuitive to Visual Studio extension developers. So, using some of the web-based technologies, we have some concerns about whether intermixing JavaScript and TypeScript with .NET is a good idea, or if we're using something like a more modern .NET and HTML framework, is it mature enough to handle some of the more niche scenarios that we want to be able to handle? Right. So the short answer is we don't really have a solution on that yet, but we're looking into it.
Yeah. So something is coming at some point.
Yeah.
So this brings up a question of it seems like when the new model goes live and people can start using it, will it have? I'm guessing that it will not have the same amount of functionality, at least in the very first version, as the old APIs.
Yes.
Are we aware of any known gaps in that as it is right now, Tina?
We're mainly focusing on editor scenarios and some project system scenarios. I think the gaps will, it'll be quite large in the beginning, but we're going to work on narrowing that as time goes on. But what we really want when we release our first iteration is for people to give us feedback, right? Hey, we've deliver these APIs to you to enable you to write these sets of extensions. These scenarios are now lit up. What do you think about the API? Do you like the structure? Do you like how easy it is to discover, or if it's difficult to discover? What other scenarios are you lacking? We're definitely not going to be able to enable a scenario like ReSharper to be running in the first release, but it will come later. Right.
So it's up to the individual extension to kind of see, okay, is my is the surface area of APIs for my extension covered in this new model?
Right.
And once it is, then they can make that leap.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And ideally, at the end of the day, once we've done so many APIs beyond just editor and project systems, the goal is to have that same functionality that currently exists in the model. Just within, yeah.
But so if we bring that back to the UI, that also then means that the solution for the UI challenge is that we will be able to have like tool windows and all this sort of stuff supported in the new. I just want to make sure I get this absolutely clear. We have tool windows and other UI elements will be supported in the new model at some point.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, so that is a absolute goal. It's something we strive to do. Okay. Here's a question from Chris. Will this new extensibility model require a new major version of Visual Studio, for instance, 17.0? If not, what's the minimum version that the new model supports? Who wants to take that?
I can start, I guess. Yeah. So currently, the new model, we're not really prepping it for Visual Studio 2019. So you probably will need the next new major version at this point in time. When that's going to happen is still not announced, but we will definitely share that once we have pieces that are ready to be used and get feedback on and all that.
Do we know if it's going to be in the first version of the next major release of Visual Studio, or could it come in an update? I'm going out on a limb and guess that at some point there's going to be a version of Visual Studio called 17.3. could it land in let's say a version like that, or would it have to be in 17.0, like in the major release?
Gotcha. We're still trying to work that out. Some pieces might happen at launch at 17.0, but we can definitely expect a lot more updates to be taking place in the middle there. So
yeah. Okay. So uncertain at this point, maybe.
Yeah.
That's fair. I really like the way you're doing this, because we've talked about this in the past as well. And it seems like you're really driving, instead of having a deadline-driven effort, you're kind of driving quality, and the features kind of have to land right. And then when you're feeling that it's right, you can release it. But it's not the deadline that determines it. I think that's a really, really good thing about how you approach this. Do we have? Here's another question. Are we going to release any tooling that helps us upgrade existing extensions to this new API?
I can take that. So as we talked about before, like with the current API being what it is, with a lot of synchronous APIs and with a lot of legacy interfaces, I don't think there would be a tool that magically upgrades your code. We're going to release documentation that helps you like move from using previous APIs to the new set in certain cases, but like an actual tool where you can say convert my project and everything just works, very likely no.
Yeah.
But our goal is to have really good documentation to help you upgrade your project, and also just not upgrade, but for people that are just getting into extensibility to actually like have a nice start, and like you don't have to browse multiple pages to understand how to create like one simple command.
Yeah, that's going to be very nice.
So we want to have a really simple model that you can start writing extensions quickly and focus on what you want to do, not focus on discovering how you do something.
Right. And speaking of documentation, Leslie, are we going to have great documentation for this? Because that's been one of the complaints for many years, right? The Studio extensibility model is difficult to understand. The documentation is not very helpful. And so what are our plans there?
Yeah, that is definitely our goal. I know I passionately would love to have better documentation for this, just given my previous experiences writing extensions in VS. So our current goal, we're still trying to work that out. But we're probably going to be doing like some massive overhaulings of a lot of it, definitely just either structurally or definitely once we get more APIs fleshed out, we're going to have to revise a lot of docs that already exist. And the goal is to make them a lot easier. So to look at like VS Code's documentation, for instance, I find personally that the VS Code documentation is really well done. I think it's structured a lot better. It's got good examples. It's got accurate code snippets throughout. So we'd like to probably model our documentation closer to their structure.
Yeah.
And hopefully update a lot more frequently on top of that too. We're going to figure out.
And we're going to use the regular markdown documentation system, right? Where the community can help fill in the gaps.
We're still planning at this point to be asking for feedback and stuff. I mean, everyone makes mistakes, so like reach out to us if there's something that could be improved or something or like a small use case maybe we didn't explicitly write, and we'll be sure
I think this is a great opportunity also for people listening, extension authors and whatnot, is that when they see one of these new articles coming out, like because you're actually going to write them pretty soon, I guess, like you're going to start it up. And once they go live, they're still going to be fresh off the press. And if the viewers out there, if you follow them and you have questions and you find something you don't know how to do certain things based on some documentation, I take it like open an issue on GitHub, right, for that piece, and let's have it flushed out as soon as possible. So this is about, we want to help each other out here.
Yeah.
Is that the community can help out here too?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about the community doing the work. Let's be honest. It's that feedback loop where we want to know, does this piece of documentation live up to its promise of helping you out or not? Mm-hmm. And if not, let's fix it.
Exactly. Like if they're watching one of your awesome extensibility tutorial videos and you point out something that maybe we didn't, then they can definitely reach out to us and we'll be sure to put it in.
That's good to know. All right. So there was a few other questions here about .NET 5. So .NET 5 was released last year and is now the current version of .NET 5. It is, however, not the long-term supported version of .NET, right? That would be .NET 6, I believe. So we got a question here from Beepin. Is VS moving to .NET 5 anytime soon? Who wants that one?
I mean, I don't think we have. I don't think we've solidified our plans for what framework we're going to support for VS yet. So I don't think we have a solid answer on that yet.
Right. We did do some testing in the past, or some figuring out whether or not VS could run on .NET Core. Right. That was your team, Bertan, at the time. I think that looked into that. Is that like, what came of that? Is it doable? Do we need to completely re-architect everything to be able to run on .NET 5 or 6, I guess, at the time?
Somebody in our team, I don't know the details, honestly. So
okay, all right.
Yeah.
That was unfair of me to put you on.
It doesn't need that work on it. I don't know the details, but yeah.
Okay.
But as far as I know, we haven't committed to anything yet. So.
Right. Okay, so let's look at this question here. Are the current and new extensibility models mutually exclusive, or can I use both models in the same extension? That's a great question.
That I can answer much more definitely because so that one is unfortunately very likely going to be no, especially. You can't use the old model from out of process. It just wouldn't work. So that part is definitely not going to work. So very likely, if you're targeting to be running on Codespaces, you can't use the old model anymore.
So the thing that runs out of proc, do we know if it's physically a DLL file that is in my v6 extension that is going to be hosted out of proc? And it's going to be initialized out of proc, such that could I potentially have in my same v6, could I have part of my extension does things that it does today, and then I have this other DLL that does things that only work on the new model that runs out of proc. And so my extensions basically have two things, but they don't talk to each other. They're separate things.
We haven't decided yet. Let me see. I mean, technically, it will be able to do it. There's going to be also like whether that's going to work in a Codespaces scenario, which scenarios are going to be applicable. So we're going to have to think about those scenarios to decide what makes sense for development. Like we don't want to. I mean, the goal is here, we don't want to route people into a wrong path where they get blocked afterwards. Like if you start writing something that runs in proc and then you realize, oh, okay, this is not actually working in the long term. So we want to set the guidelines correctly from the beginning. I mean, obviously, these are guidelines. For really advanced scenarios, there's always like things that you can go outside of the framework, like manually use the underlying APIs, but then you're not going to get the nice benefit of the framework, essentially.
Right.
So our goal is when we think about like somebody using this extensibility framework to develop an extension, we're thinking about, okay, it's only this framework being used and we are not mixing two models together.
Right.
Because we feel like there shouldn't be a need to mix two models together at the end of the day.
So could it be like the happy path, the supported path is that you do either the new model or you do the old model? If you have a scenario where you might mix them together, then maybe you can do that, but it is no longer a place that's supported, documented, or anything like that. Could that be a way to look at it?
Yes, and if there's such a scenario in the future, we would definitely want to hear about it.
Tina?
So that we can work with you to make sure that's the solution, or there's no other like solution that. Yeah.
Right. So I think our at least for our first initial couple of releases, we're going to keep them quite separate. Right. You have the new extensibility model with a new probably a new manifest, and then you have the old one, which is the V6 manifest that you're into today. But in the future, there might be valid scenarios where those two worlds have to mix. So one such scenario might be UI extensibility. Right. So until we figure out, a good solution for bringing UI out of process, perhaps an interim solution might be, we'll keep UI running on the same process still, and we would still use the existing APIs that you would use today to create tool windows and adorners and things like that. But we're definitely going to look at it from a scenario perspective to like whether it makes sense to intermix those two worlds rather than this is a general thing that people can do. Like, I can borrow some APIs from the new world and borrow some APIs from the old world and mix it together. That's not what we're aiming for.
Okay, I think that makes good sense. And the idea is that the new model is going to be as feature rich and be able to do everything you need it to do, just like the old one. And so if you find things that are not there yet, reach out to us and help us prioritize and get that done first, right? Because we have to do them kind of one by one.
Yes.
All these different APIs to convert them. Is that right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
How big an effort is that? How long is that going to take?
I would say years. If you think about the scope that the Visual Studio Extensibility SDK has today, to replace everything, but it's a tall order. Mm-hmm. But I think the spirit is that we want you to be able to write extensions that is as powerful as they are today. But we want to do it in a way that's intuitive for new users, for newbies, and then flexible enough for advanced scenarios to be authored as well. So that will take quite some time.
Yeah. Okay. So with this new model, if we are going to, let's say it's coming out and it's being supported in whatever version of a future Visual Studio, is there any back compat story, Leslie? Can I go back and say, hey, this extension I just wrote against version 17 or whatever using these new APIs, will that work in Visual Studio 2019?
Good question. So that is something that we are still TBD on. It's a question that has come up from several partners already and other people. So it's definitely a concern that we are looking to address. At this point in time, we're not totally sure what that story is going to look like for backwards compatibility and down level support yet.
Yeah, because we already have support for some of it currently in deep inside Visual Studio 2019, right? Because that's what we do internally to make Visual Studio able to connect to Codespaces. So we already have sort of some of the infrastructure in there, but then is it the matter of whether or not that's going to stay compatible with the final version, or is it a technical reason, or whether or not we're going to have back compat?
I think that's definitely part of it. I don't know, Bertan or Tina, if you want to add anything else to that. But
I can add quickly. I mean, while we have some support, like some of the functionality in the product already, we're talking about here the Brock Services API. What we plan to ship as the first stage is most of it is not there already. So there's going to be a fair amount of new components that this framework is going to require in Visual Studio. So we really don't have the answer to what happens if we want to use those APIs with older versions of Visual Studio, which doesn't have that framework in place, like which doesn't have those implementations that we had used in place. Can we use other things? Can we use existing interfaces in VS instead of those? But then that brings the question of, again, we're moving from synchronous to asynchronous. So there's a lot of technical incompatibilities that makes it really difficult, which is why we don't know the answer yet.
Yeah, right. I think that's a theme here that people need to understand. Like, we're quite a ways out from having something here, right? We want to involve people as early as possible, but nothing really set in stone. There's still a lot of exploration that has to happen on our side. It's an early look into sort of the process of engineering for this, right? Is that I kind of get that vibe. This is not like something we're about to ship. Is that right, Tina?
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. So so let's just because I think you answered this before. So just to be absolutely sure here, it'll take years for the new model to be feature complete, but you're not thinking about extensions using both the new and the old model at the same time?
I think it's kind of the wording is a little bit tricky, right? Because you can still use our current extensibility model and write an extension that works in local scenarios only, that works on old APIs only. What we're saying is we're not going to support a scenario where you can do both at the same time. Like, you can't author a v6 that has both the old API and the new API intermixed in the same extension, because it's just not what we're prioritizing at the moment. So if you're thinking about using a new API, thinking about using the new extensibility model, it's really about taking a look at the set of APIs that we do offer and then see what scenarios you can draw from that. And then the sort of the upshot of that is whatever you write in the new extensibility model will work for Codespaces. That's sort of, yeah.
What does that mean that it will work for Codespaces versus the old model would not work for Codespaces? Literally, what does that translate to if I have a v6 here?
Right. So let's say you have a v6 today, right? Let's take one of yours, like image optimizer extension that you wrote, right? Today, you cannot install that extension on a Codespace server, just because the way that the current extensibility model works today, we can't allow third-party extensions to run in the same process as the actual Codespace Visual Studio server, because if it hangs or slows down, that could be catastrophic for users. But in the new model, since extensions are running out of process, any crashes or hangs would be local to that extension only, right? It won't bring down the server. So in those scenarios, we will allow you to install this new type of extension to be installed on the server. So let's say if you were to write a spell checker, or you have a custom linter that you want to incorporate into Visual Studio Codespaces, the new model is where you could write such an extension, and it would be installable on Codespaces so that Codespace users can use it. Okay,
so that's actually super interesting. That means that I will be able to install an extension on a server instead of locally on my own machine. And no matter from what machine I access that server,
yes,
it will run and execute over there.
Correct.
Oh yeah, that's very interesting. So there's more to the story. It's not just a model. The API model that changes. It's also like how you install these things that are different.
Mm-hmm.
So we go from just having a local install to also have a server install.
Yes.
So as an extension author, do I have to know? Let's say I'm using the new model. Do I have to know whether I'm being installed on the server or on locally, or do I have to be installed on both?
I can. What do you mean, like?
Let's say that I have, let's just take that image optimizer. So just to explain to people what the image optimizer does, it lets you right-click a folder in Solution Explorer and say optimize images. And it goes in and it finds all the PNGs and JPEGs and kind of optimizes them a little bit. So that means that there's some UI right? I have to right click, and there's a button there in a context menu, and I have to right click that. It's going to put some messages out into the output window, maybe to the error list, something like that, right? But it has to run on the server because that's where the files physically are located that it has to perform on. So now I have like some UI running on the client, but the whole logic and all that heavy lifting is taking place on the server. So do I have to install both places? Can I? Do I have to care about that? Do I need to like code my extension such that it knows about where it runs, that sort of stuff?
Right. So I think from so you touch upon UI in a command sense. So buttons and toolbar items and context menus are all commands. So they appear on the UI, but it's not UI from an engineering perspective because we're not asking you to write markdown languages to kind of bring up a customized look and feel. So the current, and it's more on the data model side. So from the data model, if you're writing an extension that only touches upon data and commands, you as an extension developer are oblivious to whether it runs locally or remotely. So you don't have to worry about, oh, should this code live on the client or should this code live on the server? In terms of install, that's something different because like, let's say if you install the image optimizer locally and you want, you wrote this extension in the new model and you've installed it locally. When you connect to a GitHub Codespace and that server, if that server doesn't have the extension, your local version of the extension will not light up because it doesn't have access to, the remote file system, right? But if you were to want that extension to be available on the server, we will allow you mechanisms to get that on the server, whether as part of VS Configs, as part of environment prep, or as part of like V6 installer, where we pull down from the marketplace and install directly to the server. That's something that we're still looked at. But I think the gist is from an extension developer point of view, you don't have to worry about the differentiation between client and server, but from a consumer, you might.
Right. That makes sense. And, I'm just thinking about this. This opens up a scenario that's really interesting. You can then have, if you're using Codespaces to like host your development, right? Your project, your solution. So you can have, let's say you have 3 different Codespaces, one for each solution that you're working on in your company. You can have a different set of extensions installed in each of those Codespaces specifically to help you out with whatever you're doing. Maybe one of them is a web project, one of them is a WPF project. And so they don't contaminate each other.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that. People have been asking for that for years, to be able to isolate that sort of stuff. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Okay. So when we're looking forward to all the hard work that you're saying that you're going to do, right? It's going to take years to get the APIs to be broad enough, maybe have parity where parity makes sense. Someone was mentioning parity here in the comments. And I guess parity is not a goal in itself, right? When you're doing something sort of new like this, it's only kind of where it makes sense. So how do you know, like, are we going to make sure we support everything that the old APIs got? Or is this an opportunity to deprecate APIs we kind of don't want anymore and that we're not going to replace in the new world? Leslie?
I think that this is a good time to look back on like which of these APIs need to be deprecated, or if not deprecated, then at the very least just refocused or just reconfigured. So in a way that it's more intuitive and easier to use, especially, but also keeping the same abilities and actions that people want to use them for. So and that's what we're doing as we go through each of these APIs, like looking at editor and looking at project systems and beyond and stuff, like which pieces of it are still relevant even, and then what about it is confusing. How can we change it and make it a lot easier to use that API? And then from there, making sure all the APIs can come together and all be consistent with each other in a way. So it doesn't feel like you're having to learn a whole nother system or whole nother language or architecture in order to use a different API when you need it.
But does that then imply that all the effort going forward will be in the new model in the APIs of the new model, and we won't see much change or churn or anything like that in the old model. Is that fair to make that assessment? I think .NET had kind of similar thing when they went .NET Core, then that all effort was put in that, and we didn't see much change in the .NET framework. Just from the nature of like we have a limited amount of resources, we have to put them somewhere, right? Bertan's got his hand up.
So I want to pitch in there really quickly. So the way I want to answer not exactly to that because it won't be, I mean, the way these APIs works, the way the new model works is based on a set of remote interfaces that's going to be available both to old extensions and the new framework as well. So if there's a new feature added that, like we designed it, we added the feature, and we also added to the extensibility framework to expose that feature, there wouldn't be anything stopping from somebody using the old extensibility to use that feature as well, because they would have access to the remote interface that exposes that feature. So the answer is we're probably not going to invest in improc interfaces, like only improc interfaces going forward as heavily. But any investments we do in this new extensibility framework is going to be based on top of these contract interfaces that for cross-process communications, and they will be available to improc extensions using the old extensibility framework as well.
Okay.
So I don't think we're saying like I think I feel safe in saying if there's a feature that you can use in the extensibility framework, in the new extensibility framework, you can also use it as a legacy piece. But as I said, if you're using the old extensibility framework, you can't run in the Codespaces scenario.
Right.
So you would only be developing for local scenarios.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So the sort of under the hood implications of this, does that mean that the current APIs that we got, that people write extension awards, it's actually going to be more stable, that they're going to change less? Are we potentially going to end up having less breaking changes between, let's say, major versions of Visual Studio than we've had in the past, even though we've been pretty good at minimizing that?
I was going to say, we always try to minimize breaking changes, so I would be surprised. Like most of our interfaces, they just work. So,
yeah, but every now and again, there's a little corner here, which we, a system as big as Visual Studio, we have to do that sometimes, even though it pains our hearts. But sometimes there's a good reason for it, right? But just that could be a side effect of this effort, that we are going to have a more stable API surface.
I don't want to commit to anything. I mean, it's essentially because as a result of the changes that we're doing in the product, there might be that there are actually changes in not the API surface, but the behavior of the API. So
yeah. Okay,
it's hard to commit to such statement.
Yeah, no, definitely don't want to do.
But I mean, as you said, we try to minimize breaking changes. That's our goal. So
yeah. Okay, so Tina, I think this is for you. This is Jan. He's asking, are the new APIs meant to replace things like the DTE and MEF functionalities? So let's just, what are those two things? Let's start with that.
So I'll start with MEF. MEF is kind of an extensibility framework that Visual Studio uses to kind of do dependency injection and how we activate extensions. So editor uses the MEF a lot. Most editor-based extensions are MEF activated. DTE is, I don't know, I think Bertan might have more on the DTE history, but as I understand it, it's basically kind of a wrapper on top of our existing extensibility APIs to make it easier to write extensions. And I don't even know if it started out as, with the purpose of being easier to write extensions. It might be test-driven or something like that.
I think macros.
Macros, was it?
Yeah, back when macros.
DT was our out of process. The what we call is the
design time extension. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean you could interact with DT out of process using Comite. So that was the intent. Like, okay, we could automate Visual Studio through DT, some functionalities of it, and some of it is based on the improc interfaces. Some of it is actually unique features that are not exposed by improc interfaces. Actually, like I think comment customization is one thing that
and it's
DT
old, right?
exposes.
like 20 years
It's-
old or something.
It's very old. There were some interfaces added, but I think it doesn't contain many of the new features with like Roslyn, etc. So
Right.
yeah.
Right.
So then the question becomes: because these two technologies are used very widely by extenders today, right? And so, is this new model going to take over? Are they going to be able to replace those two very powerful, very usable technologies?
So let's start with MEF. I don't think it's our priority to use MEF as a mechanism to activate extensions in the new model. However, one of our goals in the new extensibility model is to have a uniform activation story. So today, if you have different ways of activating an extension, right? You can write a package, and then you can decide whether it's auto load or load on UI context, or you can say I'm MEF and I'm load me, import me when these things happen. So the spirit of the new model is there will be a consistent way, a single way to activate extensions, and you can customize that however you like. And then in terms of DTE, I think the beauty of DTE is that it simplifies things a lot for extension developers who are new to the SDK. So our goal is to kind of have different layers of extensibility in the new world, right? We don't want to call it DTE because I think DTE has limitations and drawbacks in and of itself. But our goal is to have kind of a wrapper layer at the top that's very similar to the spirit of VS Code APIs, right? Like that's more scenario based, and it's easy to use and probably solves 80 to 90% of the scenarios. And then underneath, we want to have, we want to give people, advanced developer scenarios access to some of our APIs are lower level, so that you can punch through and write more powerful or more complicated extensions. So I think the first layer of the wrapper that we're thinking about will be similar to DTE, but not exactly the same.
Yeah, I think that's one of the really benefits of the DTE is like it's discoverability. You can easily see what are the different corners of Visual Studio you can extend.
Yeah.
And then it's also super easy to use, right?
Right.
The object model there is very intuitive. There's nice names that make sense. You understand what it means without reading any documentation. And so it's easy access. You just have to remember one class called DTE, and everything hangs off of there, right? Leslie's laughing.
I was going to say, even then, it's like DTE, it's nice from the wrapping standpoint, but like, I didn't know what DTE even was when I just looked at the initial template code. It's like, what does that stand for? And then it took me a while to realize it was like a wrapper class, but it's like, yeah.
So, but all those goals of the DTE, and I don't know what the goals were when the DTE came out, but let's just say that those are the at least the benefits that people have by using the DTE today. Those same benefits are incorporated into the design of the new model. Correct?
Yes.
Okay.
The ideas are not the DT API. Like it's not going to be the DT API.
Right.
Well, we talked about async, so it's going to be async first of all.
I was just about to say,
nowhere close async. Yeah.
I think there's not a single method in the DT that's async. So
I don't believe you can actually. So yeah.
No. Yeah. Okay. So let's see here. I think I had a bunch of questions here, and you answered all of them like super well. So that's really good. And we don't know when this comes out, right? When do we get more updates? How are you gonna let us know as you progress? Like whenever there's something, are you gonna write a blog post? Are we gonna do another video like this? What are we doing?
Yeah. So first of all, we'd love to do another video. I don't know, like a couple months out from when we have more bits and things, because we'd love to share them that way. Also, blog posts, totally. I don't have any problem writing more blog posts, and we're kind of thinking about maybe creating like a GitHub repo or someplace where we can do more fine-grained updates when they're able to be announced to the public and stuff.
So people can get like more hands-on involved in sort of the weekly discussions or whatever once that happens.
Yeah. Like, for instance, with like these editor bits and the project systems, as we get more into that, like that stuff we definitely want to get feedback on ultimately, because what applies there is ultimately going to get extended to all the other APIs that we're going to explore and implement later. So, we want to make sure the foundation is solid.
And you did write a blog post already. I'm linking to it right now in the video here. So if people are interested, go read that. It has a nice I say introduction to why we're doing this new model. And Tina, you had another one.
Yeah.
What's this about? What's this link about?
Yeah, so we're hiring. As we've discussed, right? There's a lot of work to be done, so we're hiring. So if you're interested in working on the Visual Studio Extensibility team, and you want to join us and work with us to make these kind of improvements in the future of Visual Studio Extensibility, go to the link below and then apply.
Right, and remote work, of course. These are the times of remote work, right? So,
Yep.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me just go through the comments here. I think we got them all.
Go Gators.
Yeah, right.
So there is one about startup time. So that.
Okay, take
from
that
Schrepfer.
one. I'll look for it while you answer.
Okay. Yeah, the question was, what will be the impact on start time with this new extension model? Currently, many extensions have a huge impact on startup time. I want to take that one because I feel personal to the startup time. This new extension model, it will, if we do the things right, it will have zero impact on startup time because, as we said, like we already said, extensions are loading out of process, and we already are doing work in Visual Studio. We've been doing work in the previous releases to load things asynchronously. So this is just going to be continuation of that work. So your startup time, your responsiveness should have, like the extensions should have minimal impact on those going forward. You should be able to type. Now, the features that extensions expose might be like delayed if they're doing something that takes a lot of time to process, but your typing, your responsiveness should not be impacted going forward.
Right.
That's going to be our ultimate goal. Yeah.
But then that means that because everything is out of proc and is initialized out of proc, so that like literally means that we're loading the DLL that's inside your extension, loading it from disk into memory and initializing, like doing reflection over to whatever that means, right? To start it up. That all happens in a different process, but that takes resources. The same resources as you were doing in Visual Studio, right? So your machine still has a finite amount of CPU cycles and memory and all this sort of stuff. So that means that we have to then delay that initialization till Visual Studio is all up, just like we do today.
Yeah.
But does that mean that we then have this functionality in these different extensions are gonna kind of come in one at a time, like slowly, or what's the user impact of that?
I mean, it's not gonna be very different than what you have today, as in like if an extension was doing the asynchronous load, they're technically supposed to be loading in background threads. So the user impact, your main responsiveness, your editor responsiveness should not be impacted. But there will be a time where those features come in delayed, depending on how long they take to load, how many dependencies they have. So yes, we're gonna have to try. I mean, it's not like we're still gonna optimize the loading of extensions, but they're not gonna be impacting your interaction with Visual Studio IDE itself.
Right.
That was my goal. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, eventually, as you said, we can't get away from loading assemblies. We're gonna have to load them. So
so very similar to today, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yes, today, but we might still have some extensions that run code in main thread. So once an extension is running in main thread, then you're blocked. You can't type.
Right.
You can't interact. Yeah.
Okay. So better. That's good. Okay. I for one is very looking forward to this. That's for sure. Okay. I think we're out of time. Are there any last questions here? There is not. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for showing up and shedding some light on this. This is something that we talk about on Fridays when I do the writing extensions live broadcast, and people were super interested in this for months, ever since Leslie wrote that blog post. So I'm really happy that we finally got some answers from the people behind the decisions, and so they're gonna look out. You're gonna, make sure to get on Twitter out there. I guess that's where we're gonna broadcast the new blog posts. If there's gonna be an update, the GitHub repo that people can start getting involved more granularly. Is that all? Is Twitter the mechanism for that?
Well, I use Twitter, so anything that we do announce, I will definitely reblog on my Twitter. So
all right, so make sure
down below.
Right, so make sure to subscribe to Twitter, follow rather the Visual Studio @Visual Studio. And with that, thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
And get some yellow.
Bye.
I don't have a single piece of yellow coat. I feel left out. All right. Okay. See you next Monday, everybody. No, what is it next Monday? Is that the 18th?
Yeah, it's MLK.
Yeah.
It's a holiday here, so we're not
Yeah.
going to be back next Monday. We're going to be back the 25th instead. So see you there.
Bye.
Bye.